Today we have our annual budget response seminar. We are joined, I'm delighted to say, by Dr. Rory O'Farrell, by Susanne Rogers from Taft. Rory is an economist formerly of the EPUI, the OECD, and the NERI, and is now lecturing in EU Dublin. Susanne is research policy analyst at Social Justice Ireland, which is the independent think tank focused on justice, advocacy, and we all know them, strong advocates in terms of inequality, poverty, deprivation, and so forth. Michael Taft is an economist at SIPTU, and is a member of the Law Pay Commission, and is also a member of the National Defence Council. So what we're going to do is we're going to have each of our speakers present for somewhere 13 to 15 minutes, thereabouts. I'll give a warning with 2 minutes to go, and that will open it up to a question and answer session at the end. And with the presenter's permission, we'll put the Q&A up on the website with the presentations, but we'll see how it goes. And with that, our first presenter is going to be Dr. O'Farrell. The floor is over.
Thanks very much, Tom. All right, hello everyone. Okay. Maybe you need to click on it. Yeah.
Yeah, the working for you?
Yeah, awesome. Okay, thanks for coming along. Just to say the main points of the presentation I'm going to make today is that budget 2025, it doesn't add to the inflationary pressures, but long-term issues have not been addressed. I think the extra money we have, we should put into a national infrastructure fund and agency. Hospitality should be helped by trying to boost productivity and not with VAT cuts, and that there should be more done on housing. So I'm going to start off by just outlining where the economy is and what will be the appropriate thing for the government to do. And so the fiscal stance, I think, is appropriate in terms of not putting too much money into the economy or not taking too much money out. That some of the short-term constraints are easing, and I'll go through that. The budget 2025 is not really expansionary or contractionary; it's broadly neutral, but that there's long-term issues that are built in. And so, where's the economy at the moment? So basically, we could say it's simmering. It's like we're making pasta at home, and we have it on the hob, and it's simmering away. It's not boiling over, but it's. If you turn up the heat too much, it will boil over. So it's simmering, but we're probably where you want it to be. Unemployment is low, but there's a housing shortage, and we've absolutely loads of money. Which is, I remember when I started working here, I don't know, 2011, so 13 years ago, totally opposite to then. I haven't changed my presentation since. So basically, where's the labour market? The labour market's back where we were around 2019. So on this graph with the unemployment rate, so over here unemployment is really high, during the worst of the COVID. And here's the number of vacancies. So what happened was, things were, in 2019 they were reasonably balanced. Then COVID hit, unemployment went high. And then as the economy opened up, there's lots of vacancies, so as we go to the top left, the labour market is tighter, loads of vacancies and lower unemployment. So unemployment was kind of falling with a high number of vacancies, but now the number of vacancies is kind of falling, and unemployment is somewhere about 4.5%. So basically we've done a full lap. We're back to where we were around just before COVID, around 2019. Okay, so the labour market is kind of simmering away. It's not boiling over. And the other thing is core inflation. So we like to, or economists like to take out oil and food from when you're measuring inflation, because basically they change with the weather. I mean, the oil price can go up and down on what happens in the Middle East or something Putin says, And the same on food prices, they go up and down depending on how nice a harvest there was and how nice the strawberries were in Wexford this summer. But inflation, you know, it's coming, we'll say this core inflation, which kind of measures what's going on underneath, it's going back towards 2%. So this is the target that they have for inflation, and it's a little bit below what it is in the rest of the euro area. So we could say that's kind of easing back to where it should be. So, you know, the labour market and core inflation are about, you know, they're easing back to where we want it to be. The big problem, though, of course, is housing. So, you know, no surprise there. So this is the rent paid for new tenancies, and you could, so orange is houses and this is apartments. So it's kind of increasing at a slower rate, but like the rate of rent increases is still really high. So it's nearly 10% for houses, rents going up, and you know what we want is for them to be decreasing. So rents, you know, they're still not under control. And then similarly for house prices last year, you know, they began to kind of stabilise, but they've taken off again. So we say overall the economy is kind of simmering the way where we want it, except for the housing market. That's where a big problem is that needs to be addressed. So, you know, should the government pump more money into the economy or not? You know, it's a major matter of judgment. But I would say, you know, overall it should be neutral, like Switzerland, neutral. That the budget deficit, we should kind of keep it the same, similar to what it was last year. There's no need to kind of take massive amounts of money out of the economy, but we shouldn't be pumping in huge amounts either. So we could allow, you know, government revenue, you know, tax and expenditure to just kind of increase with output increases and inflation. That would kind of keep things basically as they are, and then find a way to deal with housing. Okay, so the government plans are currently neutral. So going from last year to this year, the government's deficit increased by about over 3 billion. But that's like over 2024, they pumped in an extra 3 billion euros into the economy between spending increases and tax cuts. But next year, like, or this should be a minus sign, sorry. Once you strip out all the stuff, you know, going on with Apple and corporation tax, next year's deficit, they're actually taking out a little bit of money relative to this year. So to be honest, it's basically the same as what we're doing this year. So there's not a big impulse of money going into the economy. I know it was presented as that in the you know, when the government, because they want to say, what they like to do is say, oh, we put up the pensions up and we put up child benefit and all this, whereas really they're just keeping pace with inflation. So the revenue coming into the government is gone up. Well, they're projecting to go up by 4.75%. So basically in line with inflation and the growth of the economy. So that's kind of more or less staying still as a share of the economy. And this is, like, you know, I agree with this, and the Fiscal Council agree with this. You know, no disputes really there. For revenue, expenditure, what the government's spending money on, it's basically the same. So, you know, it's just basically going up, matching inflation and the growth of the economy. So, I mean, if you're saying that's fine for revenue to go up like that, you should be saying it's fine for expenditure to increase at that rate, and that's what I think. And the Fiscal Council should agree with me, but for some reason they don't. So it just kind of shows they've a bias against spending. So they're like saying, yeah, revenue that grow in line with economy and inflation, but revenue should, but spending shouldn't. So they're a bit inconsistent with how they look at comparisons of the two. Okay. So, but there's underlying problems. Okay. Next year, the government, they're going to have a balance of 9.7 billion, which is like absolutely loads and loads of money. But the thing is, we're getting in even more money that we can't explain. So we're getting in about 15 billion in excess corporation tax. Now, this isn't the Apple money. That's for 2024. Next year, we're getting in 15 billion. And then we also benefit by about 4 billion because the economy is doing well. You know, because unemployment is low, we don't have to pay out so much in social welfare and stuff like that. From the business side, we could say we get about 4 billion from that. So that means we should have a surplus of 19 billion just to keep everything, you know, if we were to eliminate all this kind of funny money we're getting, or if all this funny money were to disappear, we had a surplus of 19 billion, then we'd be going back to zero. Or another way of saying it is that if all the money we're getting from this corporation tax disappears, we have a hole of about 10 billion euros next year. And just to make a point, this money we've been getting in corporation tax, the Fiscal Council think we got about 44 billion in unexplained money from 2015 to 2023, which coincidentally is about the size of the bank bailout. So it's like we've been paid back that money in corporation tax, and we're getting a little bit extra. So that's one way of looking at it. But the fact that there's the 10 billion euros that we would be in a deficit if we weren't getting all this money from corporations is a major risk. And just to put it like this, during the financial crisis, when it's working here, we estimated that $1 billion of consolidation would cost about 10 to 20,000 jobs. So to close that 10 billion gap would cost about 100,000 to 200,000 jobs. And it's much easier to do that now when it's kind of like you're creating more jobs and you can spend it than doing it in a recession when you're destroying jobs. So it'd be a lot easier to kind of try instead just grow the economy a bit more slowly and close that 10 billion over a few years. And like there's major international risks. The obvious one is like what's going on in the Middle East. You know, apart from the human aspect, you know, what would that do to oil prices? And the United States has a fiscal deficit of 6% of GDP. That's quite a large deficit, given that their economy is doing quite well. So that basically means if something bad happens, the United States doesn't have much space to boost their economy. Unlike like when COVID hit, they had the space to boost their economy and, you know, spend a lot, but they don't. So if something bad happens, like the United States is going to take a big hit, and then so do we, likely. Okay. So what I would have liked instead is if the government tried to close that 10 billion gap, which basically they just allowed to open up over the past few years with tax cuts and so on. And there's loads of ideas from the Commission on Taxation and Welfare, so I'm not going to get into them. Just say other people have good ideas, so I'm not going to look at what they say. And also I'd like the National Infrastructure Fund. So, and the National Infrastructure Agency, because we keep doing projects like the National Children's Hospital, we make mistakes, and then the people in the Department of Health, maybe they learn from the mistakes, but they're not even working on the next project, which could be in Department of Education or University of Limerick, who knows. So instead, I think it'd be good if there was a National Infrastructure Agency, which you know, they wouldn't be doing all the building work necessarily themselves, but they would have architects, you know, surveyors and all these people directly employed to kind of make sure that the plans are experts in procurement. And like we kind of learned a lot with building up the roads, road network, and it seems like we forgot it. So if we keep all that in one agency. Okay, just a few further points.
You're turning it.
Okay. So hospitality, should there have been a VAT cut? So the hospitality sector is stable, but it's not booming. Okay, so it's based, this is employment in accommodation and food. It's basically back where it was in 2019. And it's not crashing, it's not booming either. Other parts of the economy have grown, so they might feel they're left behind, but like, I don't see a great need for cuts in VAT to support the sector. And in terms of the volumes of what they're selling, it basically is back in 2019. There are some parts of accommodation and food sector, basically pubs, selling booze in pubs. The volume of alcohol being sold in pubs compared to year 2000, it's gone down almost half. But this is a long-term issue that's not going to be solved with a VAT cut. And it's government policy that we drink less. So, you know, it'd be kind of going and pushing against that. So, you know, there also some areas are hit differently from other. Accommodation isn't doing too badly because they've got loads of money housing refugees, whereas cafes and so on, they're kind of suffering in some areas. And then city centres versus suburbs, you know, because lots of places in the city centre have closed down because people are working from home, then places in suburbs have opened up. So it's more a kind of churn has happened rather than the sector falling. So instead, we'd be better placed using money to try raise productivity in the sector through training and so on, rather than VAT cuts. Last point on construction. This is a big problem, or well, it's a problem. We expect, you know, to build more housing. Employment in construction will be increasing. It's stalled, and it's actually down. The number of people employed in construction. And people said, some people argue, oh, that's because we're building less offices, maybe. But the number of dwellings, houses and apartments being completed is down 5% so far this year. So, I mean, we want it to be going up. Like, we're not building enough as it is, and it's down 5%. And some people in the sector will argue that, like, there is, it's going to take off next year. I mean, next year. Sure, everything will be brilliant next year. So central bank are saying there'll be a slight fall in houses being built. Well, I think it's definitely an area that needs more money to be spent on it, to build more houses, get city council, county councils to do it. So just to wrap up, from a macro perspective, the budget doesn't make things particularly worse, but it's not solving any of the problems that have been created over the past few years. It does, yeah, and we should put the extra money into an infrastructure fund, and construction shouldn't be stalling. That's a policy failure that the government have kind of gotten away with. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Rory. Next, we have Susanne Rogers. Susanne leads on community development, social inclusion policy for social justice.
Very much. I don't know what to stand like from behind you, maybe Michael, that might be the hand this thing, but I'm not in the way. And I have my timer on. Yeah. Which would
Might need to, yeah.
just a heads up, this is part post budget analysis part pub quiz. Okay. Who's paying attention here?
What's the price?
I was looking for gold coins to see if I could hand them out, but I think it's the wrong time of the year. It'll be a Christmas thing to hand out little gold.
Click through, I think.
Oh, okay.
Fine.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're going.
Rory, only a couple, like. Oh, there we go.
Here we go. Okay. So each slide is a song title. The first one is for Kalash. There you go. I mean, obviously, we're coming at it from a slightly different angle. I'm going to press start on this. And I'm conscious as well that there's huge swathes of stuff that we haven't touched upon in the sort of 12 to 13 minutes. Money. All the things I could do if I had a little money. I mean, the conversation, as you said, that we're having is so different from our neighbours next door. They have no money in the kitty. So many countries are having a very, very different conversation coming into their annual budgets. We are awash with money. I have figures here which I took directly from the tax expenditure document. However, Parliamentary Budgetary Office have slightly different figures. So we're into the millions and billions. I mean, that's probably the shortest way of doing it. And I think, again, what I keep reminding myself is when we talk about millions and billions, I think almost interchangeably. A million seconds is 12 days, a billion seconds is 31 years. So the order of magnitude between those two figures is absolutely vast. It's huge. But I think when we're having these budget conversations, I lose sight of the difference between those two figures. So I mean, that's the bottom line. Enormous revenue coming in. I mean, we saw in the summary economic statement that we had, I think it was 1.8 for new measures, 1.4 for tax cuts. And immediately you're thinking, okay, choices are definitely being made. 1.4 million for tax cuts puts about an extra 5 we're back in our pockets. That money could have been and should have been used elsewhere. It's a country of full employment, career opportunities. Anybody know who that's by? The Clash? No? I'm showing my age here. We are a country of full employment, whatever that means. Really strong market. Budget 25 didn't really provide much for the low income earners, those who earn too little. Too much to benefit from welfare rights, but too little to get the value of the income tax charges. So there's a massive gap there. Again, what we see, and I did bring a few of our budget analysis there, what we see over time and time again is that the tax measures that come in benefit those who are on higher incomes and do nothing for lower income earners. The USC, it's a very different conversation again, I suppose. A lot of this goes back to the conversation about our tax take, expanding out our tax take, Commission on Taxation and Welfare. That was the question. How do we pay for all the things we want? You could see that in a lot of the places, or a lot of the alternative budgets as well from other parties. We're also looking at changes to USC. I think these slides will probably be put up afterwards, so there's a lot of text in them. Money's too tight to mention. I think you should all know this one. Again, I mean, in a country with full employment and a considerable budget surplus, we still have huge rates of poverty, massive inequality still exists. So choices were made at budget time about where to put the money. 10.6% of the population were at risk of poverty. The SILT figures last year were difficult to get your head around because we were factoring in inflation and we were factoring in the temporary measures. But the bottom line is, while poverty may have come down as a figure, we saw deprivation was going up. So the actual money in your pocket was getting you less. And I think that's something that we can see time and time again. A lot of people have done research on it that you can see where, again, the lower income households are those who are most impacted by inflation. They've got a higher rate of inflation. They spend more of their money and they also spend more of it on the essentials, such as fuel and food. Government has very clear anti-poverty commitments, and we saw nothing really in the budget. There was no vision in this budget, and there was definitely no anti-poverty strategy. The SDGs were not mentioned at all. There didn't seem to be any focus on what kind of Ireland I think we wanted to come out of this budget. Job seeker, favourite mods, too much swearing I don't have on a Spotify playlist for the group. What we saw in the core rates of social welfare was a €12 increase, which didn't go far enough. Most of us were calling for a minimum of 25, and even with the 25, that wouldn't have scratched the surface. No matter which way you come at it, core rates of job seekers or job seekers allowance or any of the core rates of social welfare benefit, they don't meet the minimum essential standard of living. They don't meet the poverty thresholds. So anybody who's reliant on social welfare for their core income is pretty much automatically in that poverty figures. It's slightly interesting, but we saw a slightly higher increase in maternity benefit, adoptive benefit, and parents benefit. So there seems to be a lot of discussion about the budget being for parents. So they got an extra £3. A lot of one-offs, huge one-off payments. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that should all be temporary. One-offs, we're into 3-offs now, I think, are we? So yeah, they need to change that. But they were, they were kind of lump sum measures or temporary payments. But we saw no addition into the core rates of things like fuel allowance and living alone allowance. Again, there's an acknowledgement there in the lump sum of 400 to those in receiving disability allowance, blind pension and invalidity pension, that there is extra cost linked with disability. but we didn't see it in the core ratings. Mary Wallopers, I think, are responsible for this particular track. Again, we could see there was the extra 20 quid. We didn't see the younger job seekers rates equalised. Again, that's a huge regret. And again, with all of these one-off measures or three-off measures, a lot of lump sums, 2.6 billion was spent by the Department of Social Protection, their biggest budget in the history of the state, and 1.2 of that was on temporary measures. So they will have washed through by Christmas. I think the only one for next year is the second of the energy credits, 125 quid will be going into everybody's account next year. Wage double fit, again, Sleaford Mods, we welcomed we had to, I suppose, the slight increase in minimum wage. It's just a shame it's nowhere near the living wage. Stuck in the middle with you. This is the squeezed middle. And what a lot of our sort of distribution analysis will show is that the tax take is permanent. So the changes to income tax will be permanent. They're baked in. So you're gaining year on year on year. And those who are on the lowest incomes, the changes to welfare basically wash through. So we're just seeing that gap widen all the time. Homelessness, you got a home, Clarence Frogman Henry. Again, the number of homeless people, I don't need to go into this. Everybody can see the headlines. Every single month, it's a record high. We didn't really see anything in the budget. There's a few bob, I suppose, being thrown at homelessness, but not prevention. It's more the services, which they are needed. But what's the answer to being homeless is a home. I mean, it's fairly straightforward. There was nothing there for housing first for families. Again, the damage that's being done, we are going to be paying for in societal and economic terms for a very long time. And nothing going on with the rent went Guthrie. The rent credits were increased, but analysis done by my friend and colleague here last year when she was with me, showed that for most people, for those on lower earnings or for those on the lowest incomes, the average benefit was actually €1. So increasing out that credit isn't going to have quite the impact that maybe they would have. To build a home, that's Cinematic Orchestra. Again, we didn't see much in the way of, I suppose, real commitment. I think there's a lot of words here, but there's a lot of words in the actual budget documents about, the need for construction. The Housing Commission report, huge piece of work, brilliant piece of work. I don't know, as you said, if we're doing even worse this year than we've been doing previously, this is the key issue. We saw nothing for people in long-term mortgage arrears. We were going back to those impacted by the trackers. Older people, I can tell you this is why I wouldn't think. Again, for older people, an issue right the way across, I suppose, the developed world is the number of people aged 65 and over, which is a real success story. We are living longer, we are healthier longer, but we saw last year that poverty amongst older people would have doubled without those temporary measures in the budget. But there doesn't seem to be any real there's no commitment to benchmarking the social welfare or paid state pension, despite assurances that are being given. And I think, again, what's a concern coming up is the amount of older people who are going to be living and retiring into private rental accommodation. Everyone's got to learn sometime the corgis. Again, way too much writing here. Sorry about that. This is probably off I'll read later on. Again, our education system is, demographic pressures at all levels. We are an exceptionally well-educated country. I'd imagine I'm in a room of exceptionally well-educated people, but it's the small cohorts, it's the 2 and 3% here and there we really need to be putting our efforts into. Country roads for our rural neighbours, again, national broadband funding, there was extra funding for rural development. But we didn't really see what we would have liked to have had. There was no mention of rural transport in the budget, which is really key, I think, when you're looking at, including in Dublin, I suppose the transport could be done with a bit, joined up thinking. We saw there was the establishment of the Just Transition Commission earlier this year, and again, huge allocations into these infrastructure, climate, nature funds, additional funds from the carbon tax revenues. But again, there was no detailed spending plans. And I think this is who's more money, more problems. That's the one, yeah. But again, we had 2 new funds introduced. Like they have so much money, so much money, and really, as you said, kind of hard to know what to do with it. And we didn't really see a plan for a lot of the money. And I think what was extraordinary about this budget was there was so much money spent and nobody seemed to be happy with it. There didn't seem to be any particular cohort, like no matter who was analysing this, it could have been IBEC, it could have been, you know, the unions, whoever it was. There didn't seem to be anybody really happy with their lot. And again, like the spending that's coming out of this as well is absolutely huge. I don't know what we're actually going to get for it. I don't know what 2025 is going to do for most housing compared to this year. It doesn't seem to be, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference, certainly not to the poverty rates. The last one then, again, this is just on our taxation policy. And double points, if you can tell me the Beatles record label, extra points.
Rivers Apple.
Apple.
All the things.
So yeah, you know, I mean, like all of this money, we are awash with money. The tax expenditures, I think, was a concern for us in this particular budget. That we saw again a lot of tax expenditures or tax break included. Same thing as last time. There didn't seem to be end dates put in place for any of them. We had tax breaks for again R&D, capital allowances. There was a lot there for intergenerational wealth transfers. The mortgage interest relief. It's the same conversation over and over and over again. If we want the things, we want how we love to pay for them. And this is not really, I don't think, how any of us would have come at this particular issue. Just the sustainability, I think, long term. In the two minister speeches, they said future and future generations. I think maybe 5 or 6 times. I was trying to keep tabs on it, but I don't see that really brought out in any of the tax packages that were in there. I think that is my last slide. Thank you very, very much. And so it was more just, I think it was a shame because a lot of money, and I don't know who's actually going to benefit from any of it. So thank you. Mike.
And Michael, Cynthia.
Okay, thank you. I don't have bonus slides like Rory. I don't have a song title for each slide. But hopefully, what I have hopefully is a provocative presentation. We must become fiscally conservative and economically radical. Budget 2025 was fiscally reckless. Increasing spending, cutting taxes, and relying on transitory tax receipts to balance our books. It's like 2006 all over again. But with the difference, we are now using transitory corporate tax receipts rather than transitory stamp duties and property-related tax revenue. In the summer economic statement, the government said that the headline position, the budgetary position, masks underlying vulnerabilities, and the current favorable situation is attributable to the increase in corporation tax receipts, at least part of which is windfall in nature. The government cannot and will not use these transitory funds to fund permanent increase in expenditure. So how is that cannot and will not work it out? Not so well. Budget 2025 estimates that these transitory corporate tax receipts will be about 15 billion. 6 billion is being put into the long-term funds, which are the nature fund. That means 9 billion euros is being used in the economy, despite what they say in the summer economic statements. And 43% of corporate tax revenue comes from 3 companies, 43%. This is a very dangerous place to be going forward fiscally. But this allows the government to talk to 2 different audiences at the same time. They talk to this audience. Oh, don't worry, we're fiscally prudent. Your public finance is safe. But over here, they can say, don't worry, we've got a lot of monies. We'll see you right. Give you a small little, just a tiny little example. The newborn grant, 280 euros grant on top of which would be a child benefit. It's supposed to come in January and February. But some people rang the Joe Duffy show and gave out about the fact that they were going to have a child in December. So what does the minister Heather Humphreys does? She talks to that part of the audience. don't worry, the Christmas babies will be looked after. Because there's enough money. But then she turns around and says, but we're fiscally. Now, what is happening is, at a time when growth is slowing down, average annual GNI star per capita growth before the crash was nearly 4%. In the period of recovery after the crash, 2012-13, it was nearly 3%. The government's own estimates suggest that it's going to be closer to 1% and keep going down. By the way, that's not a sign of dysfunction. That's a sign of the economy settling down after going up and down and all over. That's a long-term thing. But the point is, this is actually going to reduce the revenue that the economy generates as a general rule. And yet they're cutting tax. In the last two budgets, nearly 4 billion euros tax has been cut. 4 billion euros out of the economy and taxation cuts. And never mind the fact there's been challenges in aging demographic, climate change and all that. We should be strengthening our tax base. This is a good time to do it, by the way, when the economy is on the up and up, rather than cutting it. We're running a deficit at the wrong time. Rory put up some stuff. It came up to 2025. But as we can see, the underlying deficit, when the transitory CT receipts are removed, shows that it will be in deficit all the way up to the end of the decade. And this is something I would disagree slightly with Rory. I believe the budget is pushing the economy beyond capacity or potentially beyond capacity. It's really pushing at it with a number of negative consequences. But a key point here is that a key economic measurement, which is the deficit, surplus deficits, they do have kind of real life impacts on the economy. It is hidden. And it allows this government to claim that they are doing something that they are not. That is pursuing appropriate cyclical policies. Again, it's that talking from one side to the other. Why is it expansionary? Well, first off, the general rule is you don't run expansionary budgets during a period of strong growth. And there are warning signs coming out that this may be heading into a less favorable place. Domestic inflation, not total inflation, but just domestic inflation is averaging about 4% in the first 7 months, about 4%. And this compares to 2.7 headline. In fact, it's actually now double because the headline's falling. Inflation reduction is being imported, mostly due to energy costs. Here is again another problem. Just as we are relying to balance our books, to make fiscal policy safe for the long term, just as we should be doing that, we are importing all this money in from outside, which is the corporate tax receipts, the windfall corporate tax receipts. We're relying on external factors. Here, we are relying on external factors to drive down our inflation, rather than trying to get our own domestic inflation, which we have much more influence over. We have very little influence over energy markets. And as Roy said, they'll go up, they'll go down, and all that. We do have some influence over our headline, but again, we're relying on external factors that we have very little control to see the economy right, just within the fiscal situation. Structural budget deficit of nearly 3% out to 2030. This reflects the underlying deficit. And underlying current accounts, that's the difference between, how much we sell abroad and how much we buy in. Negative means that you're actually importing more than you're exporting. If you're in positive, that's fine. It's gone into deficit for the first time in 10 years when transitory receipts are excluded. But we don't know if it's manageable or if it's structural. No individual measurement tells a story, but together they provide a warning that we are pushing too hard on the economy. So what would be a progressive approach? The productive economy needs fiscal and price stability. Government over the last 20 years has been largely pro-cyclical. When the economy's been going up, they've been pushing it up even further, like before the crash. When the economy starts collapsing, what do? They start taking money out of the economy to make sure that we go into a deeper and longer recession. Those are irrational responses to economic conditions. It should have all been the opposite. It should be a counter-cyclical position. And that's what progressives need to do, is challenge this fiscal dysfunction. Remove corporate tax receipts from outside the budget and sequester. That doesn't mean you don't use it. You can have a debate about how to use it. Keeping consistent with economic growth, because there's certainly a lot of things that we need to use it for. but you take it out of the budget so we have a clear position of what our fiscal situation is. Run current budget surpluses during a period of upswing, allowing for appropriate borrowing for investment purpose, and begin the long road to increasing overall tax revenue based on capital taxes and employers' PSI. If only because we do not want to rely, one, on borrowing when we don't have to. Borrowing is necessary, but when you don't have to do it, don't do it. But secondly, so we don't rely on these windfall or transitory corporate tax receipts or external factors that are driving down our inflation. We need a fiscally conservative program with an economically radical one. I'm going to go through some of just a few points. We need a strong social state. It's a major contributor to sustainable economic growth. We cannot build a strong social state while cutting taxes. And just to give you an idea, we would have to increase, this is our peer group, we would have to increase spending on public services by 12 billion euros just to reach this average. 12 billion euros. That's how far behind we are in terms of other countries. And everyone will have to make a contribution. You just cannot say, oh, the rich will pay for that. The rich cannot pay for additional investment. The rich cannot pay for additional social protection. The rich cannot pay for public services. Now, no problem soaking them. No problem. But don't think that's going to buy you a strong social state. We're being, we're fooling ourselves and fooling others. Here's the other thing, forest and trees, big debate on the 9 million euros spent on phone pouches. I don't want to belittle the issue. The issue of the impact of social media on children's educational and psychological effect. However, 9 million euros, and yet no attention has been given to the massive underfunding of our education system. We would have to spend an additional 900 million or more at primary school level alone just to reach this average. Here again, at the bottom of our pyramid, 900 million. And this underspending is replicated at secondary and replicated at third level. But so that's the difference in terms of where the debate is going to be found, on the 9 rather than the 900. Public services can contribute to price stability. Over the 3 years between August 21, August 24, inflation rose by 17%. Electricity and gas, 45%. And it's still 45% higher, even though it's coming down. But as you can see, look at the areas where there was actually actual price cuts during this price inflation. Things that, public services, bus fares were down 35%, childcare 21%, railway fares 20%, third level education 8%, hospital services 4%. In other words, the government expanding public services and providing them for free or at least below market costs can actually help maintain price stability. I'm not going to say a whole lot of investment, and because everybody's in favor of investment, but let's just have a little backdrop here, because it's going to be a long-term process to get back up to trend. Big increase through 1995 in our public capital stock. That's the total amount of investment that's gone into actual creating of assets, roads, buildings, hospitals, stuff like that. But then during the period of recovery, it actually fell marginally. Stayed static during that period, between 2011 and 2019. So you can say there was a lot of money spent on it. You can see how much more money we're going to have to spend for over a much longer period to try to start shifting that dial up and ensuring that we have economic and social investment. Mobilize the resources. Commission on taxation proposals. That's where I would start in terms of creating trying to raise the tax revenue to pay for services. Fiscal Council estimated we could raise 15 billion euros based on the Commission on Taxation proposals. Unfortunately, the Commission on Taxation didn't give a yield of how much their proposals were doing. So, but fair enough, Fiscal Council came in. They had to make all sorts of assumptions. But here's the 15 billion. But some of this would be quite controversial. Does anybody want to argue for property tax quadrupling to raise this amount of money? I know if I was candidate, or not candidate, canvasser for a progressive party, the last thing I'd be doing is going up the doorstep, hi, would you go for Progressive Party A, because we want to quadruple your property tax and ensure that we have a stable source of revenue. No, but you are talking about things like property tax. And of course, they proposed €2.5 billion in indirect taxes. Well, again, you would hear quite rightly a lot of complaints that that's regressive. Although I just point out that some of the countries with the highest level of indirect taxation, Sweden and Denmark, have the lowest levels of poverty and social exclusion. Tax is only one side of the coin. It's what you do with that tax. But that's the way. Just coming up with the last couple of slides here. The NERI SIPTU study found our domestic market sector to be the least productive in our peer group. And in particular, hospitality was at the bottom, like so many other sectors. Depresses living standards, investment, it depresses from tax revenue. Raising productivity is not about wage suppression or tax cuts. Don't listen to these employer organizations. They say, we need to build a productive economy. We have to cut taxes and we have to stop these low-paid workers from getting a minimum wage increase. This has nothing to do with productivity. It doesn't even feature into the measurement. That's just the fight over profits. That's all that is. What we need to argue for in terms of creating a productive economy, radical extension of workplace democracy, starting with collective bargaining, but going beyond that. Because every study shows, the jury's not out on this, it came in a long time ago, where people are involved in the decision-making process in their workplace, that workplace becomes more productive. We need to create a new wave of good companies, including public enterprises, that promote employee participation, privilege reinvestment in work training and decarbonization. In time, a long time, in time, these will replace the low-low businesses. So we have to identify and promote those kind of good companies. We need to establish and expand public banking at business and retail level so that we can have banking that supports the productive economy, and we need to eliminate low pay. All of that will create a much higher productivity standard in our domestic economy. Second to last thing, cultural struggle. We have to engage in a cultural struggle. What is that? That means we have to actually debate, have to enter into the debate and change the terms of the debate. Employers, owners are demanding a cost competitiveness charter. Watch that word. That's going to be the new word in 2025, competitiveness. It will come out of every politician, every business owner, every commentator. Competitiveness. Now, for employers, and the right-wing ideologues, those are code words for wage suppression and more business subsidies, tax cuts, etc. We need to challenge this. I'll give you just one small example, child poverty. Child poverty is a social obscenity. It's an attack upon that particular child. It's an attack upon members of that household. It should be quite rightly, near the top of the social agenda. It is also an economic issue. It should be near the top of a competitiveness charter, because child poverty is a long-term and consistent drag on the productive economy. It poses additional costs and on public finances. Abolishing child poverty would, in the long term, be a boon to domestic enterprises and public finances, contributing to long-term fiscal stability and prosperity. We have to start making these things part of the debate on competitiveness, on productivity, on efficiency, in order that we frame the debate in terms of a flourishing economy and a flourishing society. I use the word flourishing specifically because it's a word that was used on a podcast that we were on, and I told her I would steal it. So that's the first of many things. In conclusion, we need to build a strong social state, mobilize revenue, address infrastructure deficits. That cannot be done in the short term. This puts even greater emphasis on long-term fiscal and price stability. Productive economy requires challenging economic powers and right-wing ideology through workplace democracy. Engaging in a cultural struggle over competitiveness requires a different way of engaging the public debate. And this is an open door. In a recent Ireland Things poll, 50% do not trust the government to manage public finances. 38% do, 50% say no. 75% rightly believe the budget was an attempt to buy votes. People have a sense that, don't try this on me. Unfortunately, the election is not likely to feature these issues. It's going to be issues like, are you going to join Sinn Féin? Are you going to go in coalition? Like, it's going to be all this, who's going to partner who? It's like, what is it, those speed dating things? It's just going to be shooting around, seeing who's going to end up with who. But our first opportunity, when the new government comes in, whatever that government is, under the revised fiscal rules, they will need to adopt a 5-year fiscal structural plan. Now, comrades, brothers and sisters, whatever, we sat it out during the austerity period. There were some lone voices, but collectively, the left and the trade union movement sat out the austerity. We did not engage the fiscal debate. We did not engage the macroeconomic debate. We shouldn't allow this to happen this time. So that when that debate on the 5-year fiscal structural plan comes up, I know it's the most exciting thing you can imagine. Nonetheless, that's what we need to get stuck in. Thank you.
Well, I'm excited about 5 years.